6 in 10 UK retirees say they have a major regret about their retirement, and most people, when they hear that, assume the regret is the same one: not saving enough, not starting a pension sooner, not putting more away. But that's not the regret that comes up most often when you actually talk to retired people. The regret that keeps surfacing, the quiet one, the one people don't say out loud at first, is different. It's about spending, or rather, about not spending when it mattered most. The real danger isn't retiring with too little. It's retiring with a solid pot, feeling financially secure, and then spending the first 10 healthy years barely touching it, living too carefully, postponing the trips, the experiences, the things you always said you'd do when I retire. And by the time you finally feel safe enough to start spending, your body has other ideas. That's a loss you can't recover. No financial plan fixes it. Now, I'm not saying saving is the wrong move. Of course it isn't. But there are 5 retirement regrets that UK retirees name again and again, and most of them have nothing to do with the size of your pension pot. They have everything to do with how you thought about retirement in the years leading up to it. Let me walk you through each one and show you what to do differently. Let's start with something that might feel uncomfortable. A 2025 survey found that 1 in 3 UK retirees said unexpected expenses, things like car repairs, a new boiler, a family emergency, made their finances significantly harder than expected. Not because they hadn't saved, but because they hadn't built any flexibility into how they planned to spend. And a separate study by Northstar Wealth Management found that 20% of retirees discovered they needed more money than they expected, not at the end of retirement, but at the beginning, because they hadn't planned for the front of retirement. Think about what that means. These weren't people who failed to save. They saved, they did the right thing, but they had no spending plan. They just had a pot and a vague idea that it would last. Now here's the structural problem with standard retirement advice. Most of it treats your spending as a flat line, roughly the same every year from 65 to 90. But that's not how retirement actually works. Spending is heaviest in the early active years, and it drops significantly as people move into their late 70s and 80s. The money you don't spend while you're active and healthy often never gets spent at all. It just sits there. That's the trap. And it's not a trap set by some financial villain. It's a trap set by the very habit that made you good with money in the first place. I used to think the safest retirement was the one with the biggest pension pot. It took me years of working with retirees to realize that the safest retirement is the one where you actually spend your money while you're still healthy enough to enjoy it. I was wrong to prioritize the number over the life. If you've spent 35 years being disciplined, always doing the sensible thing, always thinking about the future, your brain will naturally want to keep being disciplined. And that's precisely the trap. The very habit that got you here is now the one that could steal your best decade. The financial industry, in fairness, benefits from you keeping your money invested for as long as possible. They manage more assets, collect more fees, but you're the one who loses the health window. Nobody's going to ring you up and say, "Arthur, it's time to go to Portugal. You've earned it." So the real question isn't whether you've saved enough. It's whether you've built a plan for actually spending it, and spending it at the right time. If you're a Gen X saver who's spent decades building your pot and wants to make sure you don't waste your healthiest years, subscribe now. Every week I share practical frameworks to help UK retirees spend with the same confidence they saved with. But there's a deeper layer to this. It's not just about spending in general, it's about the specific regrets that show up again and again. And each one has a practical fix. So let's go through them one by one. Regret number 1 is the most common: not starting a pension early enough. Hargreaves Lansdowne research found that 6 in 10 people have retirement regrets, and the single most common one is not starting sooner. And I'll be honest with you, I've made this mistake too. When I was younger, retirement felt like something that happened to other people. I'd get to it eventually. The maths doesn't forgive that kind of thinking. Here's why it matters so much. The power of compounding is strongest in the first 10 to 15 years. If you delay starting by just 5 years in your 30s, you could lose hundreds of thousands in eventual growth. Not because you contributed less, because your money had less time to work. If you're already in your 50s and feel behind, there is a practical option worth knowing about. It's called carry forward, and it lets you use unused annual pension allowances from the previous 3 tax years. The annual allowance for most people is currently £60,000. If you've had years where you put in much less than that, you may be able to catch up with a larger contribution now, subject to your earnings and scheme rules. It won't undo lost decades of compounding, but it's one of the more useful tools available to late starters. Regret number 2, not planning earlier for how to actually spend in retirement. This is subtly different from regret 1. It's not about the size of the pot. It's about having no idea what to do with the pot once you had it. Which found that 1 in 7 retirees wish they'd planned earlier, and 1 in 10 wish they'd taken proper financial advice. And this makes sense when you think about it. Most people spend 40 years building a pension and about 2 weeks deciding what to do with it. There's no plan for how much to draw down each year, no strategy for which years to spend more, no framework for what enough even looks like in practice. The fix here isn't complicated, but it does require sitting down with a blank page and actually designing your retirement spending, not just your savings. That's something we'll come back to in a moment. Regret number 3, underestimating the true cost of retirement. This one catches people by surprise because it's not just about the big things. It's the steady drip of costs they didn't account for. The North Star study showed 20% of retirees needed more money than expected. The Which survey put it at nearly 1 in 3 saying unexpected expenses. A car, a new roof, a family situation made their finances noticeably harder. Retirement costs more than most people plan for in the early years. Inflation erodes purchasing power over time, and people often forget to build any buffer for genuinely unplanned events. A sensible approach is to set aside at least 10% of your pot as a contingency reserve, not invested in something volatile, just accessible, before you even start calculating your annual income. Regret number 4, not preparing for care costs. This is the one nobody wants to think about, and that's exactly why it becomes a regret. Which found that half of retirees are worried they won't be able to afford care when they need it. Care home fees in the UK can exceed £1,200 per week, and the common assumption that the state will step in and cover it is only partially true. Local councils do cover some care costs for people below a certain asset threshold, but the gap between what they fund and what good care actually costs can be enormous. It's worth knowing that deferred payment agreements exist, arrangements where your local council covers care costs and is repaid later from your estate. And immediate needs annuities are a product worth understanding if care becomes necessary later. But the real point here is simply this. If you never think about it, it can undo decades of careful saving in just a few years. Regret number 5, retiring too late out of fear. Which found that around 1 in 10 people retired too early, but the ones who retired too late, about half as many, so roughly 5% of retirees feel they stayed too long. That doesn't sound like a lot, until you're the one who spent 3 extra years in a job you didn't enjoy, watching your health window narrow because you were frightened the money wouldn't be enough. This is the 1 more year syndrome. Loss aversion and status quo bias keep people working past the point where it makes financial sense. Every extra year you work past the point where you're financially ready is a year of healthy retirement you're giving away, and you cannot buy those years back. Knowing about these 5 regrets is useful, but it only takes you so far. What most people are missing isn't awareness, it's a practical framework for actually doing something about it. That's what comes next. Here's the framework I want you to take away from this video. It's not complicated, but it does require a shift in how you think about your retirement pot. Most withdrawal strategies treat your pension like a steady income stream, draw roughly the same amount every year, and hope it lasts. What I'm suggesting instead is something that matches how retirement actually works. Front-load your spending. Spend more in the years when you're well enough to enjoy it, and plan for lower spending later. I remember sitting with a retired teacher, 66 years old, £250,000 in his pension, who was genuinely frightened to spend £300 on a weekend away in Cornwall. He'd saved for 40 years, done everything right. But his brain was still in accumulation mode, still treating spending as a threat rather than the point. It took a lot of work just to give him permission to enjoy the money he'd built. That story is not unusual. It's actually the norm. So here's a simple 3-step approach. Step 1. Work out your enough number. Take your essential annual spending, the non-negotiables, housing, food, energy, transport, and multiply it by 25. That's your baseline. If you have that, you're broadly in a safe position. For most people, this is a number between £200,000 and £400,000, depending on their spending level and what the state pension covers. Step 2. Build a spending plan, not just a savings plan. For the first 10 years of retirement, your go-go years, allow yourself a higher withdrawal rate, something around 5% of your pot per year. After 75, reduce that to around 3.5%. This front-loads your spending while you're active and lets the remainder sustain you more quietly later. Here's a quick example. If you have a pot of £300,000 and your essential spending is £12,000 a year, 25 times that gives you £300,000, so you've hit your enough number. At 5% withdrawal, that's £15,000 a year for the first 10 years. After a decade, your pot has reduced to roughly £150,000. At 3.5%, that's about £5,250 a year, which, combined with the full new state pension of around £11,900, gives you a reasonable income floor for the slower years. Step 3. Practice spending. Start small. Book something you want but don't technically need. Feel the discomfort. That discomfort is real, and it's the exact barrier you need to start dismantling. But even with this framework in hand, there's a psychological block that stops most people from actually following it. And it's worth understanding why. Let's talk about why this is hard. Not because you don't know the numbers, you probably do, but because the psychology of spending after a lifetime of saving is genuinely difficult to change. There are 2 biases at work here. The first is loss aversion. Your brain registers spending as a loss, even when you can completely afford it and even when you've planned for it. The second is status quo bias. After 40 years of saving is just what you do. It's your default. Changing the default feels dangerous, even when the math says otherwise. This is completely normal. You're not broken. The financial system spent decades training you to think this way, to delay, to prioritize the future, to make do now so you can live well later. The problem is that later has arrived and the training doesn't automatically switch off. Here's the reframe that I've found most useful. Instead of asking yourself, can I afford this? Try asking, what am I giving up if I don't spend this? Because the cost of not spending is real. It's just invisible. Skipping that trip to Portugal at 62 might mean you have £5,000 more sitting in an account at 82. But you'll have traded a memory you can only make while your knees still cooperate. That's a cost. It just doesn't show up on a bank statement. So the goal isn't to spend recklessly. It's to spend intentionally, with a plan, in the years when it will actually make a difference to your life. So here are 3 things you can do this week. None of them require a financial advisor, though seeing one is always a sensible idea. First, calculate your enough number. Take your essential annual spending, everything you genuinely need, not everything you'd like, and multiply it by 25. Write that number down. That's your target. If you're already past it, you have more permission to spend than you probably think. Second, build a spending plan for the next 5 years. Not a budget, a plan. A budget is about restriction. A plan is about intention. Write down what you actually want to do, the trips, the family experiences, the hobbies you've been putting off. Give each one a rough cost and a rough year. Which, found that 1 in 7 retirees wish they'd done this kind of planning earlier. The antidote to regret isn't more saving, it's a one-page plan you can actually follow. Third, practice one deliberate spend this month, something you want but don't technically need. It doesn't have to be large, a weekend away, a dinner out, a purchase you've been talking yourself out of. The point is to feel the discomfort of spending intentionally and to realize that the discomfort passes. Your financial instincts will tell you it's a mistake. Your life will tell you otherwise. Retirement is not a reward you earn by suffering long enough. It's a phase of life you've worked hard to reach. The goal is to actually enjoy it, not to leave your children a larger inheritance because you were too careful to spend on yourself. If you want more frameworks like this every week, subscribe now. There's a lot more to cover. So here's the takeaway. The biggest retirement regret isn't saving too little. It's missing your healthiest decade because you were too cautious to actually use the money you built. 6 in 10 UK retirees have regrets, and most of them weren't caused by poor savings rates. They were caused by poor spending plans. Use the go-go years budget. Front-load your spending in the years when you're well. Define your enough number. Build a plan for your next 5 years. And start practicing the habit of intentional spending now, before it feels too late. You didn't save for 40 years to live nervously in retirement. You did it to actually live. If you're a British saver approaching retirement and you want to keep building your confidence around money in this phase of life, subscribe and join the community. New videos every week.